Welcome, Japan.
Welcome to another edition of Welcome Japan. I'm your host, Mr. Radrey, where I interview creatives inside or outside of Japan. And today on my show is Patrick St. Michel. Now, I recorded this interview prior to this intro, but there is a huge audio issue with it, so I decided to cut it out because it's basically unlistenable. It's just, if I were a podcast, if I were listening to this casually, I would turn this off immediately. So, therefore, I wanted to introduce Patrick the right way. Bear with me, the Guy Raz way from How I Built This. Patrick is a Japan Times writer who works for them freelance from time to time. Patrick mostly writes about Asian pop culture. This includes mostly music, a little bit of television, and internet culture, and sometimes food. However, in the beginning, Patrick always wanted to be a sports writer. He originally moved to Japan in 2009, and when Patrick arrived, he had next to no knowledge of Japanese pop culture. You may be also familiar with his voice because he sometimes appears on the Japan Times podcast, Deep Dive, particularly the episode on Netflix's reality dating show, Terrace House, and a piece on the Japanese talent agency, Johnny's. Patrick, additionally, is the writer of a 33 and a third book. You may ask, what is a 33 and a third book? Well, a 33 and a third book is a series of books that started in the early 2000s, in which each volume is written about a single album, or a piece of music. Mostly an album. Patrick wrote his about Game, not as in, like, that's the name of the album, Game, by the J-pop electronic group Perfume. Now, you may be asking, how did Patrick get permission to write such a book? Well, for Patrick, he just got lucky. All he did was go to Universal Music's fact page on their website and wrote to them directly. And in this fact page, he wrote them an email and pitched them his idea for his book. At that time, Perfume was touring in the States and were looking to promote more of their work in English. Now, prior to all this, Patrick had been writing about the Japanese music industry for a total of 8 years. And luckily, they were familiar with a lot of his work. Patrick told me about the book itself took about a year to write and just another year to edit it with his editor, Noriko Manabe. So, to talk a little bit about the genesis, about how this interview was created, the interview between me and Patrick St. Michel. Michel. I often make that mistake a lot in the interview. You may hear it. Or maybe not. You get a point. I don't know. You get a special click or something if you time code when it is I say I mess up Michel or Michael. Patrick messaged me. It was through a contact of mine. You may know him, Tikyo Sam, who he was particularly doing a lot of Patrick was doing a lot of end of decade pieces for the Japan Times, and he was looking for YouTubers, people who've been on the platform for over 10 years. And I started in 2009 making YouTube videos, which makes me, I guess, fit into that category. And luckily, Tikyo Sam, the YouTuber, recommended me to him, and he eventually contacted me, and we did the interview. Now, personally, I wanted to do the interview live on Welcome Japan, but of course the Japan Times wouldn't allow it, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. So, for this project, I sat him down, I said I would like to meet you in person, and let's have a conversation. So, with all this setup in mind, let's get to the real interview.
What do you think of the term J-vloggers?
Yeah, the term J-vlogger, you asked me about that. You were saying that some people were offended by that term? Was that right?
I don't know if offended is the right word. It wasn't like they were like, how dare you? It's more that they don't like the term, is the sense I was getting. Their rationale being, and I'm paraphrasing them, is they don't necessarily want to be just limited by that J, the Japan part. They feel like they do more than just like introduce Japan. There's so much more to them than just the like check out Japan thing. That would be the argument I've heard. I'm indifferent. I'm not a J vlogger, so I forget. You're cool with the term, yeah?
I'm fine. I don't really care because it seems like nowadays you need to have the right terminology or nobody will pay attention to you, basically. And that's like the name of the game. I mean, if
it's branding,
if you've ever been 5 years old and you've had brothers or sisters, you know how to get attention,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really care about the terms of the name. Should I be? I'm not sure. It's just words.
I guess basically, yeah. Just for brevity's sake, I'm writing about J-vloggers during this decade because I think, I don't know, I feel for a lot of people, especially outside of Japan, J-vloggers really offered one of the better gateways into the country. Just some of the names, especially, like Rachel and June abroad in Japan. I think they have done what blogs used to do and even what newspapers used to do with writers that would be sent over to a country to cover it for, like the New York Times or whatever. Like, they're giving people a snapshot of what's happening in the country. And for people who can't get to Japan or can only observe from wherever they're living, it's like J-vloggers, to me in the 2010s, were really effective at doing that. And I think it helped a lot of people learn about Japan. It resulted in all kinds of commercial tie-ups. You're still seeing some J-vloggers work with like travel companies or local governments to promote things.
Like abroad in Japan or something?
Exactly, yeah. I think he's done some. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask him.
Okay.
But I do know a few still do that. And yeah, I think it's also a very interesting like phenomena that happened. So right now, this story, I'm trying to talk to as many J-vloggers as possible, including yourself, and just, learn about how people felt over the past 10 years about it and how it's grown, how it's changed, how it's impacted others. So yeah, that's very much in progress though. So we'll see how the final product comes.
What particularly interested you about this topic? I mean, opposed to like something else, like let's say, I mean, most people, when they think about YouTube Japan or like foreigners who are talking about Japan or doing docuseries, they're just going to go to, abroad in Japan, right, opposed to like going to somebody like a smaller creator like myself. Mm-hmm. What was your motivation and basically for the article?
I've been following the J-vlogging. Just gonna keep doing that. Sorry, the J-vlogging community.
It's why this is a visual show.
That is actually good. Quotes. I know. I don't have to say I'm doing air quotes right now, but I've been following it for most of the decade, and I've like written articles for the Japan Times about various people in this community. I've interviewed some people and have just like looked at various trends in J-vlogging over the 2010s, and I guess part of it is. The motivation is I do think J-vlogging is one of the more interesting developments of the 2010s. Personally, I'm always fascinated by sort of the images that are created of places, between places. So like J-vlogging, for example, you're getting this one image of Japan that's being broadcast to the rest of the world. And for many people, that's how they interpret the country. It doesn't matter if that's accurate or not. That's what they see. So I'm always interested in these exchanges. It's something with music I'm interested in, something with food even, just the way things travel and how things kind of change in that exchange. That I think J-vlogging has been one of the best examples of that this decade. And so part of it to me is to make a really good in-depth story. I wanted to really talk to just as many people as possible. So like, I want to talk to these sort of the top level channels, if you will, the ones with the most subscribers. But, the story, all stories have just all kinds of perspectives on them. You can't just talk to the people at the top because you'll find out all kinds of interesting stuff from stuff in the middle, stuff from the side. So it's been trying to just look through as many YouTubers as I can remember and finding new ones along the way to sort of learn about the history, how people have felt about major developments in it. Right now, this is real knock on wood territory, since I haven't written the story yet. This could all go up in flames 2 days from now.
Oh, no. Did I botch it from doing this?
Hopefully not. We'll find out.
Jesus.
But ideally, this story will end up being a sort of a nice, all-encompassing look back on the decade with a wide variety of voices captured in it. Hopefully.
All right, looks like this kind of brings me up to my other question. When you write for the Japan Times, let's just say any Joe Schmo who wants to write for the Japan Times, is it's all based upon you just writing an article and then you just say, hey, you want to buy my article? Is it like that? Or what's the process look like?
Journalism advice corner.
Yeah, no, I'm not a journalist, so I wouldn't know.
Right. Well, no, this is good. I think this is actually, and this is something I feel a lot of people maybe don't know, which is good to know. So usually what I do, and I think a lot of journalists working for the Japan Times, is we pitch our editors stories. So, for example, this YouTube story, before I'd even reached out to interview anyone or done any research, honestly, I talked with my editor who'd be in charge of it, and I said, I have this idea for an end of decade story. And I would sort of lay out what I wanted to do, how I envisioned it. And then he said, all right, go for it. Give it a shot. And that's usually how I approach all my stories. There are exceptions. Sometimes, especially with interviews, you have to check if you can get the interview first. You don't want to promise an editor, I can interview Perfume. And then it's oh, JK, that didn't happen. Sorry.
You can say that to them, JK. Just kidding.
They will not be happy. You could say that, but it won't go well.
Sorry, dog. Can't do it.
It's experienced journalism levels.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes if you get the interview before, I've conducted interviews with artists or people and then have tried to sell them places. Oh, would you be interested in this story, Japan Times? And if they're not, I take it somewhere else. But in general, and anyone who is interested in pitching the Japan Times, I would recommend finding out the name of the editor of the section you're interested in. And then I think you can find all their emails online, so it's not too difficult. And reach out and have a pitch ready, sort of saying this is a topic I'd like to cover. Here's who I think I could interview. Here's sort of the idea I'm going for. Think of it like an elevator pitch.
Yeah.
You get in an elevator with someone, you have a minute to win them over with your idea. That's the best way to pitch a story, honestly, at any publication. So you can try sending an already written story, but sometimes editors will be why would you send this to me? Let's
really?
Talk about it first. Huh. And another important thing with the Japan Times, especially, is they still put out a physical edition of the paper. Many newspapers, especially in the States, don't do that anymore because...
any ones in particular you can think of? I can't think of any right now.
Mostly smaller, small town newspapers, especially. Okay. I mean, New York Times, Washington Post, I think LA Times still does it. The bigger newspapers still put out a physical edition, but a lot of smaller ones don't, just because the internet has devoured everything. And yeah, JT still does. So as a result...
It's because we're old-fashioned here in Japan.
It's part of it. Thank you, Japanese consumers. But because of that, scheduling is very important. So if you just send somebody a finished story, it's kind of okay, what do I do with this? Whereas if you pitch something in advance, the editor can figure out the best time to run it. They can sort of lay out a groundwork for editing it and sort of helping you put it together. Just sending something, sometimes it can work, but in general, editors I've met who've experienced that are kind of it's not the best way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Always pitch first and then go from there.
So before I ask you, I was going to ask you a question about pitching, but before I do that, do you like seeing your name in print? I mean, I'm not I mean, not print as in a digital footprint. I mean, print as in like a physical newspaper. When you write an article for the Japan Times, it comes into the newspaper, right?
Yeah. Most of them.
Okay.
I'd say 99% of them. It's weird actually because not to get too like industry doom and gloom, but I'm somebody who's more interested in seeing how publications can develop online.
Okay.
So, and the YouTube story is actually a really good example of this. When I pitch that, I'm thinking of it as an online first story. So I'm thinking like, oh, cool. What videos could we embed in the body of the text? Like, what links can we use? How can we design this to look cool on a website?
Right.
So like, because to me, I realize the physical paper is very important, but it's still kind of limited what you can do. And I'm kind of interested in imagining what the internet allows you to do.
Right.
It is still like neat to like know that like I don't know, sometimes you go to a hotel somewhere and they have the Japan Times and you're like, my name's in that? That's weird. Or like I don't know if this is the best example, but there was a time U.S. President Donald Trump like tweeted a photo of him he was reading the Japan Times.
Okay.
After one of his Japan trips.
All right.
Now, I'm not going to say I'm necessarily proud of that personally, but it's still weird to think that like...
Well, you see like your name and then Donald Trump's face.
Right.
Okay.
It's
that is like, a little weird.
It's like he might have seen my article about some J-pop idol group and like, did he think...
He doesn't, I mean, unless...
He's not going to read that.
Unless it's like pen, pineapple, apple pen, then maybe not. Unless you wrote about that.
I interviewed him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Pico Taro.
Pico
Taro, Donald Trump's BFF.
Because for our audience out there, yes, Donald Trump has actually met Pico Taro, and there are photo proof of it on the internet. If you don't believe me,
that was the first thing him and after Trump was elected, I think Shinzo Abe he rushed to New York to be the first world leader to meet him.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
I read about that.
Like the first thing they talked about was PPAP. Donald Trump was like, my grandkids love this.
That is so odd.
Well, that's reality.
Okay, well, let me ask you this:
now.
what is your opinion on PPAP? I need a raw take here.
Raw 2016 takes.
Hot take. Or no, a hot take is like when you say something negative. Just raw take.
Okay. I like the spirit of PPAP. I mean,
yeah, it is. It's a nice spirit.
The thing that always made me kind of respect it is I don't know, with music and a lot of entertainment in the 2010s, I think a lot of it is very sort of controlled and a lot of the viralness of it is kind of fake. I think it's very rare to have something that is sort of grassroots viral anymore. I think there's just so many labels and so much manipulation that goes on. I don't know, just like a label telling some influencer to be shout this out, it'll help its numbers grow. But PPAP was one of the rare things that truly was out of nowhere. There was nobody being we have to push this. And yeah, it's to me, that's when I picture the internet, when I would use the internet growing up in the late 90s or 2000s, that was how I viewed the internet, kind of this sort of bizarre frontier where anything could become popular.
Well, yeah, some people have called it the Wild West before.
Yeah. Back in the day, you never
think back in the day, not anymore today?
I think things are too controlled now. Everyone's figured out the internet is where you have to be, and it's you see famous people trying to make TikTok dance crazes now, and you're just oh, you're trying too hard, but it'll probably work. But yeah, PPAP was a throwback to me of
interesting.
This is when Badger Dance could be big or something.
Oh, Badger Dance. How old is that?
I don't want to go too into it. That'll reveal my age. So
okay, I remember that. Well, it's okay. I'm 32.
I'm 32 as well. So
okay, all right. Well, then
we can just talk about archaic memes now.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Keyboard Cat. Shout out Keyboard Cat.
Keyboard Cat's not that old though.
Is he?
It's a couple of years, I think.
It's been a while.
Has it? I don't know. I mean, time always feels so weird once you get past a certain age.
This is going to get to the existential part of the podcast.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Oh, well, let me backtrack a bit here. So when you interview Japanese celebrities like Picotado or some of the singers in Perfume, are the interviews conducted in Japanese or in English?
It's a good question. It depends on the situation. In general, I want to do an interview in the language that the person is most comfortable with. So, because sometimes there are Japanese artists who, know both languages, but usually it's English, it's something they've studied, and they can be good at it, but it's not their first language, so they're not as fluent in it as, in Japanese, obviously. And in the end, you want them to be most comfortable so that you have a conversation. So I always want to make sure that it's the language they want. And depending on that, I'll sort of go from there. In general, I'm somebody who is not confident in my Japanese speaking ability to conduct a good interview. And especially, I think one of the most important things as a journalist is you want to get everything right. You want to be accurate. So I don't want to risk, getting facts wrong because I need to flex my whatever Japanese language skills I have. I don't want to be all right, let me jeopardize this interview so I can show them that I can speak like a fourth grader. So usually,
you just saying that reminds me has somebody else done that already?
It's possible. But so in general, I try to, if the interview is conducted in Japanese, I want to have a translator with me. And I'll hire my own if necessary, because to me, it's very important to make sure that, one, the conversation flows in a way that's very natural, and two, that I'm making sure I get all of the facts. And it also helps, when you're talking with entertainers or anyone, really, if you have someone there who is Japanese, they actually know most of the pop culture references or reference points that the artist might be talking about. So I don't know everything about, for example, Japanese music in the 80s, but if I have somebody who grew up in the 80s, they might be able to be oh, no, I remember this too. So it helps just clarify things in the moment. So that's basically how it goes. It depends on what the artist or person wants, and then I accommodate from there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Where do you go to get a translator? You just go to translators.com or something?
I'm lucky in that I have met a lot of people who are bilingual and who...
Oh, really?
Usually in the... they work in, the music industry, or, there's musicians I know who are willing to help me. And, I pay them because it's a job that should be rewarded, It's not, for exposure or anything. So, yeah, it's just kind of figuring that all out beforehand. Just reaching out to people. I have worked with, professional translators before, too, for, bigger stories.
Oh, really?
Yeah, those are always interesting. Those are, people who, they, translate for, Will Smith while he's here. It's
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. But they're just very talented people, that's for sure.
How do you get to know some of these translators? You just, a friend of a friend or something?
Well, with that person in particular, it was, again, just through a label, kind of connecting you. It's all about just meeting people and then learning about the people they know. And yeah, you just build these relationships over time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just, kind of being social, even though I'm not a social person.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me asking this question, but so let's say I wanted to conduct an interview, but I needed a translator. Mm-hmm. What's an appropriate amount of money to pay them for the interview?
It depends. Everyone's different, and it kind of also depends on their, I guess, skill level. I don't even know if that's what you call it.
Right.
Trying to think. It depends how long the interview is. It depends also sort of how much I would be paid for the story. That also depends on length, I suppose. You kind of negotiate from there. I would say, what what is a common thing?
Let's say an hour interview.
I would say somewhere between 6,000 yen and ichiman yen, 100,000 yen. Somewhere between there, depending on circumstances.
I see.
Yeah, I would say.
And they seem pretty satisfied with what it is you gave them?
Usually, I think so.
I guess in Japan, people are usually too polite to really tell you anything. So it can be kind of frustrating sometimes.
Sometimes, at least one of the guys I work with who's great, like he's said, for this I need more. Like,
oh, okay.
Nice try, Patrick, but higher. And like, okay, you're right. You deserve it.
I'd actually prefer that if they told me. Because that way I don't feel like it's not one of these like guessing games.
You're not second guessing everything. Yeah. Like, do they hate me?
Yeah. Well, like, what's your rate? Well, what's your budget?
Right.
What's your budget? Well, what's your rate? What's your budget? It's just like this back and forth.
It's like
it's just really awkward.
Non-direct haggle.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to a little bit here in the interview, but you were talking about pitching articles to people. Or not to people, just the Japan Times. Have you ever written for any other news? I mean, there's like a couple of other newspapers. There's like Japan Today, and is that it?
I
don't know. Is that it?
Well, there's Japanese English language newspaper update. Oh, who is it?
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Mainichi still has an English publication. I think Asahi does something. Yeah, Japan News. I guess Japan Today counts. They're not a newspaper, but they're an English language news site.
Oh, okay.
I haven't written for any other newspaper. I have written for magazines that are in Tokyo.
Like Metropolis?
Yeah, I've written for Metropolis.
Okay.
I've written for Tokyo Weekender a while back. And then I've also written for a lot of like overseas publications. So for music, I've written for Pitchfork, Stereo Gum, NPR.
Oh, really?
Who else? Jeez. Bandcamp Daily. It's music sales platform. Bandcamp's like editorial site. I've written for the Sydney Morning Herald about Kyari Pamu Pamu. And just like the Atlantic. All these places blur together after a while.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So freelance hustle.
I don't know too much about journalism, which is why I'm asking like the most noob questions.
No worries. Go for it.
Okay, so I guess this is something like you learn in journalism school. Is that right? Because you were saying earlier that this is like journalism 101, that it all starts with the pitch and then...
Yeah, the thing... So I went to journalism school. It was probably a good investment overall. But I don't actually think they ever taught us how to do a pitch email or anything.
Oh, really?
I'm sure they did at some point, because they didn't really teach you how to be a freelancer. That's something you just kind of learn over time. And I guess I'm just lucky that I was able to figure that out. I guess I'm lucky that I've been able to talk to other journalists who do it. Because, yeah, we didn't actually really learn that element of it.
So where did you learn it? Just based upon experience?
I think eventually, yeah. I'm lucky in that, in a ironic twist, it's not ironic. So my mother is a freelance journalist as well.
Oh, well, that helps a lot.
That helps. So she would always be able to be like, oh no, you have to pitch something. So it's
I
okay.
see.
So that helps. But it's also talking to other writers that you meet along the way. And in Japan, it's I would say it's overall a pretty close-knit community. Especially with entertainment writing. That's a very small sphere. So you would meet other people and learn from them, like what to do, or they would kind of connect you with other people. That's how I actually started writing for the Japan Times, is that a music writer who I really respect, one of the best in Japan, in my opinion, his name's Ian Martin. He was writing at the Japan Times since the 2000s, and he still does things every once in a while. He's published one book and just lots of great writing. He found my writing when I was still just doing a blog from the countryside where I was living. And he was kind of like, oh yeah, there's not many people doing this. This is great. You should speak to the music editor at the Japan Times. He connected us, I believe, via Facebook. And in 2011, that's how I started writing for Japan Times.
Oh, really?
It's just like partially luck, but also partially kind of just grinding away until people see what you do, and then just going from there.
Well, You hear that, folks? It's all about the grind.
It's grind. Don't give up.
I guess that's why people tell me like what it is with podcasting is that you just got to keep making episodes. Because I have other friends who do the podcast, or I guess just one really. I mention him all the time. ALT Insider Podcast, James.
Yeah.
You listen to his show?
I've heard his show before.
You've heard of his show? Yeah, I mean, and he's always told me you gotta make one at least once a week, or you have to make sure you're on all platforms. Because like my show isn't on all platforms yet. I'm kind of working to get it there. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be on Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple's a must, and so that way it's easy for anyone to just pick it up and listen to it.
How do you distribute on those? Sorry to like.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's
the same way that maybe you're not super deep into journalism. I don't know the inner workings of like the podcast.
Oh yeah, no, it's super complicated.
Yeah,
so it's like kind of like doing this show. No, what you need to do is you need to have an RSS feed to give to the platforms. Like Apple Podcasts needs an RSS feed. And in order to get that RSS feed, there's a couple of ways you can do it. I mean, a lot of people want to do it for free, but it's pretty difficult because you need to have hosting. And then if you're going to have a hosting, that means you need to have a website. And so then you have to take that RSS feed, and then you have to put the RSS feed into, I guess, if you have a service that lets you put them on all platforms, there's a couple out there like Blueberry, SoundCloud. There's a bunch of them.
Okay.
But it's not like YouTube. YouTube is free.
Right. YouTube
Podcasting
just dive
money.
in and see what happens.
Yeah, basically.
Hope that you can become Pico Taro.
Well, I think it's a lot harder now.
Yeah.
It's like back in the day, what was it? Back in the day, like when you made a YouTube video, there's a good chance like I could make like even this interview could probably make thousands of views just because there was such little content out there.
Right.
Now because there's so much oversaturation and there's so many players, and now that the United States president's on the internet, it's kind of unleveled the playing field.
Well, right. I imagine
maybe not again. Now.
But I guess it does go back to that kind of like, putting stuff out. Because in the end, I mean, I guess this is probably like okay life advice. I mean, don't hold me to it. But like, if you're passionate about something, like, you really do just need to keep working on it, even if like nobody's reading it or seeing it. Like, that's how I started with writing. I mean, and honestly, I feel a lot of the writing I do is probably still the same. But like, just starting a WordPress account and just every day writing something because it was what I enjoyed doing and how I entertained myself living in the Japanese countryside.
Right.
So yeah, you just got to keep going at it and just get better over time and see what happens.
I'm working on a YouTube video on how to make your own podcast. So I don't know. I always feel like what you were saying earlier about talking about an article or talking about something you're going to make is always kind of a no-no, or at least in my opinion, or at least maybe other people's opinions. But because when you talk about something, that means it's half done. And so that kind of leads me into my next question here. Mm-hmm. So after you've done your pitch and you talk about the article you're going to write, you just said that there may be a chance you may not write it or finish it. Does that happen?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's all kinds of complications that can happen on that front. Like, I'm trying to think of some good examples. I mean, the most basic thing is like, you try to interview somebody, an artist being a very good example of this, like a musician or entertainer, whatever, like, and maybe initially they're interested, but maybe something comes up with their schedule and they're kind of like, oh, we don't really have time to do interviews anymore. Or like just something like they're kind of like, yeah, we don't really need this anymore. We don't want to waste our time. So like I've pitched artist profiles for JT, and the artists, or at least their management, initially are very like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. Let's set something up. But then maybe they get busy, or I don't know, something comes up where they're kind of like, they just kind of stop communicating with you, or they're kind of like, yeah, we have to do this another time. Then you just have to like basically take a mulligan on the story and be like, maybe some time in the future we can do this, or Or you just say, okay, whatever. We'll just have to kill it and do something else.
Huh.
And then this has happened to me too with overseas publications. The editor you're working with can always decide that sort of what you're writing is not kind of what they envisioned initially.
Okay.
And they can the term is they'll kill your piece. It's very, very violent. That's journalism for you. And they're just kind of like, this isn't kind of what I thought it would be. This is maybe we're moving on from this. Usually you get a kill fee for that. Like it's a smaller amount than what you were promised. So I guess it's nice you get some money. But that's kind of always a bummer because it's just kind of like the original idea they had didn't mesh with what you were doing. And it happens. But that's another thing that can happen. In Japan, I have found there's a third thing that actually can sometimes jeopardize a story. It's that a lot of artists are very hesitant to sort of usually give out their full names.
Oh, right.
So
that's Japan, yeah.
Yeah. And other countries as well. Like, I don't want to just say it's a Japanese thing, because there's even American artists who do that now. But the Japan Times as a publication, unless you have a really good reason for wanting to, withhold your name.
Yeah.
We want your full name if possible. So, but there are exceptions. There are if you're stalked or your life is in jeopardy or something, we will not publish your name. But, if you're a J-pop artist, it's you don't have anything to hide from. You're usually there's exceptions, right. But so yeah, sometimes when they're really hesitant about that, we will sometimes kill the story just because it doesn't look good. And we've found that readers, in general, if you don't give your name to an audience, in a story for a newspaper, especially, readers sometimes think that's kind of so what are they hiding? That's suspicious. Why would you do that? And it's kind of just a bad look for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it can be a really annoying thing to go through that. So if something I actually do quite frequently is up front with an artist or entertainer, where it's a profile just of them, I'll ask, is it okay to use your real name? And if they're not okay with that, I'll just say, okay, I don't think the Japan Times is right for you then. You kind of have to be ready for it sometimes.
Right.
If you think this is where you want your career to go, you have to be ready to do that. Yeah, so that's a third way that is a common problem we face.
Okay, so when I hear the term kill, what's the terminology you use? Kill piece? Or kill?
You just kill the story.
Kill the story,
You get paid a kill fee.
Kill fee, okay. The only situation I can think where that would probably happen is if you were writing something about the Fukushima nuclear plant and Japan wants to push for the Olympics.
Right.
So they don't want the bad PR. Uh-huh. So I could think that would be an example of one.
So the example I had, which is very much not like that, is I won't say the publication's name or the editor.
Oh yeah, well yeah. But this is the internet, and it is forever. So
can't know. But it was a U.S. music publication, and I pitched a story about the group Babymetal.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And this was at the point they were kind of at the height of their powers.
Right.
I think they were at their most YouTube's going crazy for these idols. It's metal, but cute. So I pitched this story just kind of talking about what was it? It was kind of introducing them and kind of being this is why they're different than most Japanese artists. And the editor was initially yeah, that sounds great. But I think they expected something that was more, I don't know, kind of more, what's the right, I don't want to sound dismissive of it, but it's more it was more maybe more feminist in its presentation, whereas what I was presenting was more kind of so this is why it's happening and this is why it's different. It's more almost, and this is something I kind of wrestle with writing about Japanese music for non-Japanese audiences. You're introducing things constantly, so you can, at some point, when you're writing about a U.S. artist, you're writing about Kanye West, people know Kanye West. So you can kind of just dive in and start theorizing.
Right.
But if you're writing about Japanese music, the majority of people don't know anything about it.
Yeah, you probably need to do that.
So you have to do that, and that kind of limits what you can do.
You find that kind of frustrating having to write it that way?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I understand, though. I mean, I don't expect anybody to be like, I would never be like, you have to know about J-pop. This is so important.
Right.
Like, no, it's something you have to seek out. I get it. I think it's great. Japanese music, lots of great music out there, worth exploring. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that is true, because sometimes if maybe you might feel uninvolved if like somebody starts talking about a thing that you have no idea what they're talking about. So I guess I can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, and just there's so much. I mean, forget just music. There's so much media out there now. Like, I get not being able to keep up with things like in your, like, even like American music. I think it would be so hard to keep up with things, like, let alone a country with music in a language that you don't understand. So I get it completely. It can sometimes feel frustrating, but in general, it's just something you kind of deal with, and you have to always understand when you're writing, like, you always need to think, who is your audience? And how are they going to approach this?
Right.
This YouTube story is a good example, because I think a lot of Japan Times readers, you know, I think there'll be a lot of younger readers who like know what a YouTuber is, but there'll also be older people, Japanese and non-Japanese alike, who don't know anything about this. So you have to still introduce like the concept of, you know, you can start a channel on YouTube and just talk about whatever you want. And this subset of people chose to talk about Japan and detail their lives in Japan.
Right.
So even something like that, I think, is important to like at least offer a refresher course for everyone.
Right. So you were saying that the kill piece you had in with the Babymetal group.
Babymetal.
So it sounds like it was just they were worried about how they were being depicted. Can I say that?
Not even that. I would say it was more, they expected something that was more, kind of maybe more with a more political angle. I don't know if that's the right word.
Okay.
It was maybe more opinionated. That's the right word. And like, I'm always hesitant to be kind of like, you know, rah, blah, blah. Because to me, it's more important introducing and getting context right. I think that was the issue. They wanted something that was more opinionated. Honestly, probably more like a hot take than what I envisioned, which is more like, okay, this will educate people about the group and show them like why it's interesting it's happening. So, and I think in the end, the editor decided, you know, it'll take too much to kind of like bridge those things. So let's just move on from this. Which, understandable. That's fine.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat. Sorry, I neglect the chat sometimes because it's just like it's just words. So if you're offended, well, you're invited to leave. Sorry, but you guys are great, but you're invited to leave. So one of my friends is in the chat right now. BLKUNK. I think maybe I mentioned him in
possibly
one of the interview we did on Tuesday.
I gotta listen to that again. So.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's probably best to always record interviews, because sometimes you miss things that...
Especially in my mind, everything slips out eventually. But what's the question?
That is odd, like how things just disappear sometimes. Like, what? I don't remember saying that.
Right.
Or like, oh man, he completely said the question I just asked. You know, it's just, it looks embarrassing.
Are you? What is this a subtweet of?
yeah. What is this a subtweet of? Anyway, the question he had was BLKUNK says, is it possible to make it without connections? I think what he's trying to say here is it possible to work at Japan Times without connections, quote unquote?
I mean, everybody starts with no connections, right? Like, when I first came to Japan, I knew nobody at Japan Times. Like, yeah, I was just some goofball in the Japanese countryside who was like, I'm bored after my teaching job. I'm gonna, like, blog about Japanese music that I'm learning about. And, like, eventually people just kind of came across it. So... I mean, in theory, yeah, it's totally possible, but you have to work for it. I think that's the key, and I think that applies for any field, really, is like, you can't go into something being like, you know, if you don't have any writing, whether it's sort of your own personal blog or your own personal like essays or whatever you've written just for yourself that maybe haven't been published somewhere or they've been published on your own platform. Like, you can't just go to the Japan Times and be like, all right, I have an opinion, give me an article. Like, you could try that, and you can try to have a very good pitch. It's completely possible to just approach an editor you've never met, find their email, and send them a pitch. And that's how a lot of people get into the paper.
Well, sometimes you see like guest writers, like I've seen like Jake Edelstein and like what's his name, DeBito. What's his name, Aruto
Debito, I think.
Yeah, and he's written for the Japan Times as well. I mean, I guess maybe you could just flaunt your clout or something. Say, hey, I'm Jake Edelstein. I wrote a book about working at the Yomiuri Shimbun, and I knew some Yakuza. Can I write for you?
Well, I think those are both examples of people who, yeah, before they wrote for the JT, I mean, they both were focused on other things that sort of helped them develop their own name somewhere, whether that's, crime reporting for Jake Adelstein, or with Debito, sort of like human rights, social issues facing non-Japanese non-Japanese residents of Japan. Like, they kind of established that beat. Like, they sort of were able to establish their credentials in that, and then, they can go to the JT or any number of international publications and be like, I know what I'm talking about. Like, here's my idea. This is my background. Like, if you're interested, I can write something for you about it. And they just go from there.
Okay.
Yeah. In general, I would say with connections, like, you don't have to start knowing people, but over time, yeah, you need to try to, like, it's okay to reach out to people as well and be like, oh, I really like what you guys do at the JT, or I really like your blog, and like kind of just slowly build connections and just be very honest about it. I mean, I think this is probably true in the YouTube community. You can tell me, but I imagine it's annoying if somebody approaches your channel and is kind of like, hey, do you want to collab? I'm sure this will really boost my channel. Like, there's a difference between, a very earnest, I like what you do, let's have a sort of working relationship, and then like clout chasers.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, that is true. It all depends on how you approach people.
Yeah.
When people come up to you like, hey, man, well, because I have gotten it on YouTube. Hey, man, sub for sub. I sub to you. You need to sub back.
Right.
Like, what is this? It's like... it's like people come. It's like going to Shinjuku and going to Kabukicho and having these random people come up to you asking you to do things. Like, no, like, come on, work on your approach. Come on,
right?
Okay, so I totally get it. I mean, I guess it's like real life.
Be real,
yeah,
be real, everyone. Let's not,
That's true, because all of the interviews I've gotten for this show, I've always gotten the interview set up because I was very real. And I wasn't trying to follow a format or some sort of... because sometimes, like, getting guests can be the hardest part about making a podcast sometimes. Arranging the day, putting the time, and it's sort of like... take this with a grain of salt, but sometimes it can be kind of like dating in a way. Okay. It's sort of like you need to know exactly what it is you want, where you're going to go, what is it you need, and because if you don't have all those things in mind, people are like, I don't know about this guy. He's like, let me...
Oh, I see. It's just not kind of like the spontaneous guy.
Yeah, the spontaneous guy, and it's like saying, does this guy have ulterior motives or something?
Is he going to show up? Is he not going to show up?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, as long as you have some sort of plan, it usually always helps.
Right. I think that helps, and just kind of being honest and like, yeah, just it's honestly like almost making friends. Just
tell me about it.
I mean, you just want to be like, you genuinely want to learn more about what they do. I mean, this is both for subjects you write about and people you end up working with. So.
I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about what your writing process is like.
Okay.
Like, what is it how do you put together like an article in 2019? Like, what is it that grabs them, quote unquote?
So yeah, I guess. Oh my god, my writing process is a mess though. So nobody do what I do.
I can't imagine anybody's process is
Some people
neat
are
and clean.
Some people are really organized.
Are they?
Yeah. Maybe they're just saying that to look organized, but
Okay.
it's because some people will have very set like like especially for a freelancer when you don't necessarily have to go to an office. So I work from my house every day. Like, and that's a weird feeling.
It does feel weird,
Right.
but yeah, I don't know.
So like some people who are probably smarter than me, they'll set like work hours. So it'll be like from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. I may be at home, but I'm working. It's like an office job. I'm not like that. I am more spontaneous with time. So sometimes maybe I'll take the afternoon off to go do something. Or like I'm going to go research something, which is like going to Tower Records and just walking around. Just like, all right, that was a good use of time.
It is research, though. You're looking at
Technically, you're maybe absorbing things.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes that results in me staying up to like 2 a.m. writing something, which probably isn't good.
Yeah.
But the writing process in general, is first pitch. I always pitch to my editors to see if they're interested at all. Because it is a really like bad feeling to work really hard on something.
Oh, yeah.
And then to have them be like, yeah, no, we don't want this. So I always want to make sure that they at least somewhat interested before I commit.
Right.
And then after that, if it involves interviews, it usually involves setting all of those up and doing the appropriate research beforehand. If it's a more essay-ish kind of thing, that usually, it's kind of just gathering, like trying to read as much as possible about the subject, both in Japanese and English, if there's that available in that language, just so you feel like you're not repeating what other people have said.
Right.
Or, I mean, especially with when it comes to writing about Japanese topics, like there might not be much about it in English, but it's always good to know what Japanese media is writing about it. So you kind of get a sense of what people think. And then you can present that as like why this is interesting. So you do that, and then once you feel confident that you have everything, and for me particularly, like I need to have everything, like all the interviews, all the research, like I need everything finished before I can actually write.
Right, no, I understand.
Yeah, some writers though kind of work like simultaneously, like maybe like if they need 3 interviews for a story, they have 1 and they can like, oh yeah, I can still write up to a certain point. Like I can't do that. So, which I think annoys many of my editors because sometimes that slows the process down. Sorry if you're seeing this. But
so you're like, this is going to sound like another noob question, but usually they give you deadlines, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm very good at missing those by a day. A good rule of thumb though is when you're starting out, especially, always make your deadlines. Like,
I guess that's
that's a really basic one. Yeah. Like,
wait a minute.
You probably didn't even know that.
Are they pretty lenient? And
not in general.
Okay, I didn't think they were.
Here's not really. I mean, this year I've been really bad with deadlines.
Okay.
For all sorts of reasons, but in general, make your deadlines, or more importantly, if you don't think you'll make a deadline, tell your editor in advance.
Right.
Don't spring it on them the day of. Be like, oh, by the way, can I have another week for this?
Oh, right,
like,
right.
If you tell them in advance, it's fine. Like, lots of writers need more time. There's all sorts of circumstances that come up where you're kind of like, okay, I need a little more. Like, if that's okay.
Because probably publications, they probably need articles for, like, spaces in their newspaper.
Yeah. That is very true. And with a newspaper a proper physical product, like, those deadlines are really important. I still think some flexibility is good. Yeah. Just because you still want to be like, this is a problem I think a lot of media faces. It's something that I encounter sometimes with the JT is like, you end up writing about something, but due to the timing of the publication, it feels like its moment in the spotlight has passed. And you're kind of just like, I think we probably could have released that sooner.
Yeah.
Like, even just online, you can put it up right away rather than wait a few days to publish it.
That's true.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah, probably like nobody's going to want to read an article about the Olympics when it's like 2021, right?
I guess it depends what happened at the Olympics.
Yeah, I guess if people are talking about in the air, if people are talking about, what happened or something or whatever, like some sort of controversy, then I guess people would talk about it. Yeah, that makes sense.
So sometimes, I guess to offer a counterpoint to that, if you present a story in a certain way where you're sort of almost looking back on it, even if it's a recent thing. This is very common with internet topics, just because the internet moves so quickly.
Yeah.
Like, if you're writing about what's a good recent, like, internet scandal, I don't know. Like,
there's so many.
There's too many. In Japan, there was like, what was a hashtag recently? I don't know. There's big hashtag, big social justice implications. Like, there was a hashtag this week where it was about, I think, there were women who were complaining about how their jobs were saying they couldn't wear glasses because it...
Oh, I heard about that. Yeah. I just saw an article about it when I was waiting for you to pick you up to bring you here.
It's still relevant then, hey. Huh. But, like, if I wrote about that a week from now, it might not be as relevant. But maybe. But if you present it in the right way, you can... It still kind of resonates. It's all about framing is also very important.
Right. Like maybe you might be familiar with that one, I want to call it a gaijin story, because I know there hasn't really been any Japanese reporting on it. But there is that one that was going around making the rounds online about eyeball licking. Do you remember that?
I remember eyeball licking is a classic, like, weird Japan story.
Yeah, it was fake news though, right?
It's always fake news.
Can I call it that? I mean, if you just say those two words, fake news, everybody knows what you're talking about. So.
Right. That's for that especially. I've always seen those stories as like, and this is maybe a good topic for journalism in regards to Japan. Like, I mean, weird Japan stories are like crazy popular with international
they're like
newspapers. I was like eyeballs for tongues. But yeah, like eyeball licking. Do you remember any other good ones from this decade? Do you remember doorknob licking?
Yeah, I remember doorknob licking.
Do you remember bun heads?
Yeah, but bun heads was a real thing, though.
It was a real thing. But
I know that guy who was in the video. Yeah, John Skeleton.
John Skeleton? Isn't that is from Nightmare Before Christmas?
No. I think that's Jack Skellington, who you're thinking of.
Sorry,
that's okay. I mean, some people say John, Jack, same name, right?
But you knew the guy who filmed the bunheads?
Yeah, I know. My dad. I remember telling my dad that because he sent me the video, and he's like, "That's not something you should be proud of." I'm like, okay.
What, you personally?
Yeah, it's like look. He sent me this video. He's like, look at all these hipsters putting this donut stuff on their head. I'm like, okay.
What hipster would do that?
It's like, okay, boomer.
Okay, wow. We're relevant now.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, if you've been paying attention.
The bagel head thing was like, it's not many people though, right? That's the thing. That's true. The thing with weird Japan reporting is it's taking something that maybe a sub-community does, or a subculture is the term a lot of people in Japan use for this. Like, I guess bunhead subculture.
Yeah.
Or bagel head subculture. And you sort of like blow it up into something that feels like a national trend, even though it really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
What are other? I mean, yeah, licking anything is always a good example. What were the other recent weird ones? It's always like fashion related things.
Okay.
It's always like hot new Japanese fashion trend. They're wearing shopping bags or something. I don't know if that's real. That might not be accurate.
It wouldn't surprise me. Usually, if there's like some sort of history behind it, then it becomes a thing. Or if there's some sort of famous person who's doing it, then it becomes a thing.
Right. Or if there's like what's the other one? It's always also like Japanese TV related things.
Okay.
Like anytime there's a Japanese game show segment that goes really big, people are like, this is the coolest thing in Japan now. Like Human Tetris.
Right. You're right.
There's always like there's always the pay-per-view channels in Japan that have like sexy games. So I won't go into the details of those.
Well, yeah, and you could just easily Google those.
Good luck. Just burn your browser afterwards.
Yeah, make sure your what is it, virus protection software is up to date.
Yeah,
that's all I can say.
But that's another one where it's like, you have to pay for these channels. Like, it's not. Well, it's
yeah,
not
that's
primetime TV.
That's kind of the misconception, and it seems like people love to have misconceptions about Japan.
And this is something with, especially what I try to do with my writing. I'm sure I've messed it up.
Make sure Japan's normal.
No, not normal.
That's what Hiko Simon used to tell me. He's like, I'm here on YouTube to tell people that Japan is normal.
Right. I mean, that's fair. That's accurate. To me, it's more just being like, this is the context of it.
Oh, right.
Like, because these things do exist and they can be interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, with music, there's all kinds of like interesting sub-communities you can find that aren't necessarily like the biggest thing in the country, but they're still cool to talk about and they're still interesting. But it's just making sure that you're not like newest trends sweeping across Japan, bagel heads, because you're just presenting this wrong image.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also something I find fascinating about J-vloggers is that they have to wrestle with this too. Or
like clickbait or something? Is that what you're talking about?
That's one word for it. It's the decision a J-vlogger can make, whether they're going to be like, do we sort of indulge in this image of weird Japan?
Okay.
Do we try to straighten it out and be like, no, this is the real side of it? Or do you kind of like go in the middle and do, which I kind of personally think is the best approach?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, it kind of gets to the point where you kind of have to figure out what your voice is going to be.
Yeah.
But which is also very odd is that sometimes you have this, like, you're familiar with Death of the Author, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of gets to this point where I feel like this Death of the Author kind of approaches me, like based upon, okay, how many views did this get? How many likes did this get? How many comments did this get? I mean, like, how much reaction did I get? I mean, like, you get this, I mean, a lot of people complain about this instant satisfaction that you kind of get through the internet, but I guess it kind of helps shape what it is the world wants, but I guess it's pretty hard because you never really will know what the world wants.
It is and this is a problem that all publications, physical or online, are facing as well in current times. And writers especially have to deal with this. It's kind of like, websites want clicks. That's what everyone wants. So you want to write stories that get people's attention, obviously. So for example, and this is something I actually am passionate about. So it's not like I was being like, what's going to get clicks? The last thing I wrote for the Japan Times last Thursday, part of this end of decade review was looking at, I made a power ranking of the mascots, Yurakera in Japan.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
you interviewed former guest on the show, Chris Carlier.
Mondo Mascots.
Yeah. I interviewed him before he even started that.
So now that's a get. That's really good.
Yeah, no, he has he did a little short online comic strip called Little in Japan.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah,
that's him.
Yeah.
So I interviewed him for that because he was just releasing his book, and then he was trying to push the whole comic edge. But I don't know. I mean, you got to do what the universe wants from you.
Well, I guess maybe that's a good example too. He had to do. He pivoted to mascots, and it worked really well.
Yeah, well, I guess that's what people know.
But that's a good example of it, is that, like, a story about mascots is going to get a lot of attention because, overseas, people are like, oh, Japan, mascots. Either, oh, that's cute, or, oh, that's weird. But, like, with that story, I feel good about it because it's not kind of leaning into the weirdness or cuteness of it. It's kind of being like, this was a real thing. It made billions of dollars for these regions. And, we can still have fun with it.
And people like mascots, so
yeah.
It's pretty safe material. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I do think it's important not to, like, exoticize Japan or any country for that matter.
Why do you say that?
Just because I do think it can be, one, it's just corny for one. Like, to be like, oh, the Far East, it's so mysterious. Like, it's not the 50s anymore.
Yeah, it is really weird. Like, I remember when I first came to Japan, I was kind of like, I kind of braced myself like, okay, I'm not going to listen to what the media is saying. And I'm so glad I told myself that. Like, don't have any expectations going in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a lot more satisfied with living here than I would if I expect a lot of things. Like,
so you didn't have any like expectations of Japan?
I did and I didn't. Like, I don't know, maybe you remember a time when like Metropolis used to run these really weird dating personal ads.
Oh,
do you remember those?
I kind of remember those. Yeah,
those are bizarre, and I mean that's, I mean you kind of have these weird conceptions. Like you see some of these people who write in there like, I'm an FOB, fresh off the boat, and you know I'm a really hot guy. Any lady who wants to message me or something really, I can't even imitate.
I don't think if you write I'm a really hot guy, you're probably a hot guy.
It was more eloquently stated. I don't know, or it was really gross too. But it was so funny how gross it was.
Grossness.
Yeah, eloquent and gross. Yeah, and I kind of had that perception in mind. You know, it's like because you know just like the whole like charisma man thing, which I think is pretty much dead or dying.
Right, I feel that's
at this point.
That's a real relic. Do people know what Charisma Man is?
I guess for anyone who doesn't know, Charisma Man was this. How would you define it?
What's a concept, I suppose, but it's probably best realized. There was a comic that ran from like the late 90s until the mid 2000s. There was this publication in Nagoya. I want to say it was called The Stranger, The Foreigner. I forget what it was called, but this guy did this comic called Charisma Man, riffing on this concept where, like, if you're a white man, usually from a Western country, like, you might be a geek or a dweeb or whatever in your home country, but if you come to Japan, you're suddenly like imbued with coolness and like, everyone loves me, I'm cool, I've reinvented myself. But obviously if you step out of that, you suck again or something. And I guess that concept maybe used to be true. Who knows? I mean, it's like an 80s thing. But yeah, that's a good example, is people see that and it sort of presents this image of like, well, either like, I don't know, yeah, Japan's just different, you know?
Yeah, I think at that time, like, because, like, there wasn't that many foreigners that came to Japan at that time, because it was a very hard country to get into, and especially being able to, I mean, you think about how much you have to let go of living in this country. You have to, like, kind of, because, like, when I came to Japan back in 2009, I had to sell my car, I had to sell a lot of my things, I had to, get rid of a lot of my things, and it was like a life-changing experience. And so it's not a simple thing. So that's why you don't see a lot of foreigners who aren't tourists who kind of live here. I guess this kind of brings me up to my last question, or my last two questions.
Yeah, go
I only
for
have two more. One of them I was. I got great words. One of them was, so what was your motivation for coming to Japan, since this is the namesake of the show? I have to ask it.
No, that's a good question.
Some people hate it. Some people hate this question, but I think it's great, personally.
Well, this is a good transition, because for me, you do meet people who have this sort of fantasy image of Japan, or some people who even have a negative image of Japan before they come. I was pretty neutral on it. I liked, I guess, a few Japanese things, but I wasn't I wasn't into anime. I didn't hate anime. I liked some of them, but I wasn't like, oh, okay, I'll devote myself to. Like, Japan was just a place to me.
Oh, okay.
So the reason I came to Japan, great question. Oh boy. So in college, I studied
Okay, I have a very embarrassing story too about why I came here as well.
Yeah, I assume you've told it on the show.
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe. We'll try to get it out of you after.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, it's not even embarrassing. So I studied journalism in college for 4 years. This was 2005 to 2009. I was in school, which was a very weird time for journalism in journalism schools. And especially for me, it was the school I went to. They hadn't yet shifted from thinking about physical media to the internet.
Okay.
It's like you couldn't study internet journalism.
All right.
like after I left the school, they got this great internet journalism like department. And if I had been there for that, I would have loved journalism while I was in college. But I came at a weird point. I became disillusioned with journalism, and I really didn't want to be a writer anymore. So I've had this realization senior year, which maybe was not the best time to have it. So I decided like, I didn't know what to do. I decided like I should just do something totally different for maybe like a year or two that would allow me to refresh and figure out what to do with my life. Classic, whatever, college student ennui.
Okay.
So I found the JET program. I forget how I found it. Probably just Googling things.
Probably just like, I won't teach in Japan.
Leave America.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, I saw that and thought, well, this could be interesting. And part of it, I guess, was like, oh, it's like literally the opposite of where, like, I'm from Los Angeles originally. So I guess in my head, it's like, oh, it's the other side of the world. That's funny. So like, I applied for JET, the JET program. I got in.
Where did they place you?
They placed me in Mie Prefecture.
Oh, okay.
Have you been to Mie?
No. I've never actually been to anywhere near... That's near Nagoya, right?
Yeah, it's between Nagoya and Osaka.
Okay. You didn't choose that, did you? Okay.
I didn't know it existed.
What's interesting is, like, if you see my Tokyo Kuni interview, he talks about, oh, I want to live in Nagoya because it's right in the middle. And he said somebody like, no, you don't want to go there. Anyway.
That's real monkey paw territory. Like, be careful what you wish for.
Oh, I see. In terms of the subject. Oh, okay.
Because, yeah, Nagoya, I like Nagoya, but it is boring, but that's kind of why I like it.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
Continue. Sorry.
That's for a Nagoya podcast. But anyway, yeah, I came to Japan really just kind of thinking that it would be like I would be a teacher in the countryside for a year, teaching junior high schoolers like English they didn't care to learn.
Okay.
Which I think is very common for a lot of people who come to Japan. And yeah, I just ended up staying. I guess one of the key reasons I ended up staying was because of where I lived in Mie Prefecture. It was pretty rural, not like deep country. Like,
okay.
It's like an hour and a half train ride to get to Osaka, but it's very much a bed town, very much a commuter city where I was based. So there's not much to do. So I started a blog where I wrote about Japanese music, makebelievemelodies.com. Still going today.
Is that the one that's on your Twitter page?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that's the Twitter account is named after.
Oh,
so I started that just to like entertain myself because there's nothing else to do. The city I lived in, it was called Nabari, and its biggest claim to fame was it was home to the biggest salamander center in all of Japan. And that's like they had 15 salamanders, and I guess that was enough to make it the biggest.
It's interesting. All right.
Each one was different. I respect that. But it's not the most social place. Very lovely, very relaxed. But yeah, my way to entertain myself was blogging about Japanese music.
Oh, okay.
And I really came to enjoy it. I mean, it did genuinely make me like writing again and kind of like got over that like whatever sort of like what am I going to do with my life sort of thing.
Right.
So that opened up. That leads to like the editor at Japan Times reaching out to me to be like, oh, you should try to pitch us music stories. And I started to do that, and I just stayed. 10 years later, here I am.
You moved to Tokyo.
Moved to Tokyo. After I had a weird 6-month time in Osaka. It was a very strange time. I lived between 2 warehouses. So like you'd be woken up twice in the morning by multiple delivery trucks. But yeah, now I'm in Tokyo, and yeah, I just have stumbled into something I like.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So
what brought you to Japan?
What brought me to Japan? No, I mean, I tell people it's a number of things. 4 basic things to sound like a normal human being instead of like a, what do they say? A weeaboo. Okay. Instead of sounding like a weeaboo, I guess I always tell people it was college because I went to Temple University. The other one was I really like Japanese movies, and what's the other ones? There's like I had a couple of rationales.
So the top 2.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, I'm actually a quarter Japanese as well. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I mean, so some kind of thing about my heritage, which
You can work that in. That sounds good.
Yeah, but I don't identify myself as Japanese. I don't really feel Japanese, if that makes
Fair.
any sense.
No, that's fair.
And I guess the last reason was I was really into swimsuit models from Japan.
Okay.
I know this is the embarrassing one.
Well, like Grover?
Yeah,
models?
that's
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yeah. So I usually never tell people that, but that's why you stayed till the end of the podcast. If you can remember
That's
that.
the power of journalism, is you get people to say things they don't say before. So there we go.
Oh, really?
Maybe,
Okay.
yeah, that's what you try to do.
Well, I mean, if you got your cyber stalking down on lock, you could probably figure that out.
Oh, okay.
So, but
I didn't stalk that deeply then.
yeah. Well, I mean, normally it's not something I normally really talk about because
It's not the top of the resume. Where it's
Yeah,
like,
'cause-
swimsuit models got to come over here.
yeah, people they group you into these weird categories. Like, no, that's not me, and they're like, no, that is you. Like, all right, okay, thanks for telling me. I don't know.
Okay, cool.
I mean, some people often complain about. Actually, here's an interesting question. Some people often complain about journalists in terms about how they're being. They don't like them because they don't like the way that. I mean, the interviewee is like how they're being depicted. Mm-hmm. Do you have any opinions on that, or hot takes, or anything?
Hot takes, all the hot takes. I mean, in the end, I come at this from a very, like, I guess, since I studied journalism in America, and the Japan Times approaches journalism like an American publication.
Right.
Japanese publications can be different. It's a whole different conversation. But I think once you agree to an interview, it's in the writer's hands. And to me, the important thing, some writers would not agree with this, but I do think the foundation is that you get all facts right. Like, you don't lie in a story.
Right.
You don't introduce misinformation. Like, mistakes happen, but, like, in general, if all the information is correct, like, I think the story is fine. Because with feature writing, a lot of times, especially with profiles of artists in particular, you're trying to sort of give readers a sense of what they're like as a person. And that often does involve a bit of, like, trying to figure them out. So, like, you'll include the quotes you get from them, the facts you've gathered from them, but it's also kind of like reading how they are during the interview.
Oh, right.
Right. Or, like, trying to figure out their environment and kind of piecing things together there. And I mean, I get why, like, the subjects of these pieces could be upset with how they're depicted.
Right.
But I mean, that's just kind of how journalism can work in some degree, as long as the facts are right. That's the most important thing.
True.
I mean, that's, to me, always the thing you have to be airtight about. Like, if you want to introduce an opinion afterwards and kind of make it clear that it's your opinion, that's fine.
Right.
But, yeah, as long as the facts aren't wrong.
Because sometimes I kind of have to live under the philosophy of, like, Eminem, you know?
Okay.
Or, like, where he says, you know, I am whatever you say I am.
Right.
You know, and there's nothing you can really do about what it is other people say about you.
I actually have a really good example of that.
Oh, okay.
Which ironically is not about Japanese artists.
Okay.
This actually involves a Korean pop group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're quite contentious nowadays, K-pop.
This was before they were even that contentious.
Really?
But when was this? 2016? Maybe 2016. I did a story, a very small, we would call it a fluff piece in journalism, because it was just this tiny little article about the K-pop group Twice, who are very popular in Japan and pretty well known globally. The angle with the Japan Times is they have 3 Japanese members.
Oh, right.
And at the time, there weren't many K-pop groups with Japanese members. That's a little more common now. But yeah, we did a really it was a really small email interview, which is what you try to avoid those in general. Some circumstances you have to do them. But this was like, okay, it's a very small story introducing them. Whatever. Like, they didn't say anything offensive. All the facts were there. The interesting thing about this group was at that time, earlier in the year, they had been involved in this controversy where they went on a TV show, and the whole shtick with their group is they have Korean members, they have Japanese members, they have a Taiwanese member. So on this show, each member like took out a flag of the country they represented and
I've
waved it
heard
along.
about this. Yeah.
You know this is coming. So the Taiwanese person took out a Taiwan flag.
Right.
China did not like this.
Yeah.
And this caused this huge scandal that lasted like a month of like, and the idol in question had to make this grainy apology video that looked like, I don't know, like ISIS was recording it. But, but like, yeah, this was something that was covered by the New York Times. Every major like media company covered this because it's a really interesting look at China and entertainment, blah, blah, blah. So I mentioned this in the story in a paragraph where it's just kind of laying out what happened. And like, we published the story. The K-pop company goes ballistic.
It's kind of like saying Epstein didn't kill himself or something in the middle of an interview.
No comment. But this was like something everyone knew, and they were so angry that they were like, "How dare you put this in? You didn't tell us you would put this in." And it's like,
wait, who said this?
It was the PR person working with the
Japan
K-pop
Times?
Company.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is the K-pop company side.
Oh, the K-pop was okay.
Yeah. And like, what made this so strange was, with J-pop companies, like J-pop labels, I should say, they'll sometimes get angry about what gets written.
Okay.
Just like maybe, oh, you didn't tell us that would be in the story or whatever.
Oh.
But they're very professional about it. It's very much like, oh, I don't see why you had to do that, but okay.
Okay, it's not written like "I don't like you" or what internet slang or something.
Yeah, this situation with the K-pop company, they were very emotional, and for 2 weeks they were kind of harassing me and my editor. I think my editor might have worse memories of this than even I do.
All right,
and like they were like threatening to cancel Twice's first Japanese show ever because of the article. Which is total, like, they would never do that. But, like, they were just over the top about it. And, like, that to me is a really good example of, like, well, this happened. This is, like, on the record happening.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, maybe you don't like that we're mentioning it again, but guess what? It happened. And people should know. So, yeah, just, like, that's the most extreme example of that.
I see.
Where it's like the subject themselves, or at least the company representing the subject, really got angry. But to me, it's like, well, I didn't make anything up. This is all well known.
Yeah, I guess I could see that. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess maybe the best example I can think of where a publication could get into a lot of trouble is like the Hulk Hogan and the Gawker situation.
That one's a minefield. Yeah. I
mean, Gawker's gone because of that, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, they were sued by Peter Thiel out of existence because of it.
Wow.
That's a crazy. And then in, I guess maybe a reverse of this, if you want, like, oh, this is actually a good example of a story that I had to, like, change because the way I initially approached it changed as I was reporting it.
Okay.
This is unrelated to entertainment. I was writing a story about, like, it was aimed for English language teachers in Japan.
Okay.
Maybe working at schools or Juku or whatever, or Eikaiwa. And it was kind of like looking at, like, when to know when you're kind of having your rights abused. Like when your employer is kind of treating you so badly.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'd say we don't really have, or at least I've talked to Hiko Simon about this, who's an attorney, and he often talks about, a lot of people ask about social rights in Japan, and he tells me a lot of them are just all basically common sense. Anyway, I digress. Continue.
So there was a guy I reached out to who I think he had a story where he had, I think, gone online and talked about how, sort of how badly his school was treating him. And I thought, oh, well, this could be an interesting example of, like what to look out for. So I talked to him, get his story, blah, blah, blah. So a very important thing with journalism is if you get one person's side of a story, you need to at least go to the other side, especially if they're saying something accusatory. You have to go to the other side and be like, so what's your comment on this? So I go to the school he worked for, and they said that was all total lies. So, yeah, that turned into this like 2-month long thing where it was having to like meet with the owner of the school and hear their story and hear how they would sue me if we did this story. But then also talking with this teacher in question and kind of realizing that the school was right in that, like, he kind of wasn't a good employee, especially the way he started talking with us.
That's a minefield.
It turned into this huge mess, and like it was for me probably the worst a story has ever gone, just because there were multiple points I was like, I'm gonna get sued, aren't I? Because in Japan you can be sued for slander or libel.
Right.
Even if the thing you say is true, but it causes the person to lose money, they can technically sue you.
Yeah.
Which is not good for journalism. But, yeah, it was just really stressful. And in the end, we basically changed the story. So it didn't have any interviews. It was kind of just like, I think maybe we interviewed a union person for a teacher union, maybe based in Fukuoka.
Okay.
And that was it. And it's like a really bad story if you read it, because it's like really disjointed and doesn't.
My goodness, it must be so stressful working at a paper.
Oh, I feel so bad for because at least with me, I have to only deal with one thing at a time. My editor has to juggle like 5 different things, and maybe like 3 of them are practically on fire as he's dealing with them. Like, it can be really tough. Like, yeah, I don't envy editors. Like, it's so tough. They have to, not only do they have to edit a story to make sure the grammar and writing and facts are all in line, they then
that's
have to
just proofreading, right?
Yeah, but they also have to make sure, like the story has the right voice.
Oh, right.
Sort of everything that comes together just right. But yeah, also the proofreading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then they also have to put out these fires.
Yeah, wow.
Sometimes.
That's,
That was the worst. Oh my God. That's a good example of, being like, oh, this story let's just change it completely, because it's a total mess now.
Well, yeah, then it kind of becomes one of these things sometimes where it becomes like I guess a dumpster fire.
It's a fair term for this.
It becomes a dumpster fire, but then it seems like that becomes newsworthy too. Like when something becomes a dumpster fire, which is kind of weird. It becomes very meta.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things, I mean, that's so common in American media now, this sort of like, let's look at the mess going on behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. It's still not quite there with, especially English language Japanese media, but even Japanese media is still very like, they try not to share those stories, the kind of like, I guess how the sausage got made and how the sausage exploded over everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is, because that would be an interesting story.
Yeah.
How it all went to hell. That's when I repressed. Oh, man.
Well, I mean, you see, because I watch a lot of creators on YouTube, particularly one of my favorites is, maybe you've heard of them, H3H3 Productions.
Oh, I've heard of them, yeah.
Because they got sued for making some videos somebody didn't like, and then they got more popular because they talked about being sued. Which is, is that the approach I'm supposed to take? I don't know.
I guess for me personally, and this is another thing I try to do with writing, I don't like, despite what this podcast has done for the past how many hours we've done this, like, I don't like talking about myself.
We're almost at 2 hours.
Cool. Yeah. I don't like talking about myself, and I don't like being part of stories.
Right.
There are some writers who think that like enhances the story. And that's a fair viewpoint. And I've done it a few times. But I like just focusing on the person that I'm profiling or writing about. So like, I don't know, like when things go amiss, like in all of these stories, I just kind of like, I don't want to put this in the spotlight, because I don't think I'm that interesting. Though I hope everyone here has enjoyed this.
Yeah, no. I mean, I always try to do a interview where I answer the questions I want to know. Mm-hmm. You know, that way it kind of feels like it's more of a personal project.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you can't always ask the internet for, like, what does you want? They're not going to say anything.
Right.
I mean, I've said in other interviews before, it's like you kind of have to do YouTube, or as a creator in general, kind of like you're a teacher. And you have to just kind of expect that your students aren't just not going to listen to you unless you're interesting.
Right.
So then you just kind of have to do things from your own motivation.
Exactly.
Which
At least
often leads to a great product sometimes.
Oh no, I think in general, as long as you have that, because usually, yeah, when you're so focused on making something work for an audience, it's gonna miss, you know? Yeah. So,
all right. So my very last question. I always like asking this is usually how I like to conduct interviews. Is I like to do a kind of a silly question in the beginning and a silly question at the end.
you got those silly question bookends.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, usually it's about like if they have like an interesting name. What is the origin of their name, or
Alas,
if they have
Patrick is boring.
No. I mean, you had the name Japan Times. I can obviously throw that around, and you wrote a book, so it's better than someone who's just been doing YouTube for a long time. Not like there's anything wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a heck of an
letting
accomplishment.
you know, but
I could never do that.
Interesting names. So
that's fair. That's fair.
But my question is, your Twitter handle is a picture of a kiwi bird. What is the...
Ooh.
I want to know why a kiwi bird.
Question. Oh, shoot. I might have to look up the name of it. So, I'm a big fan of Japanese music from the 1980s.
Okay.
Perhaps, it's kind of enjoyed a resurgence this decade. It's a sort of subsection of Japanese music called city pop.
Oh, yeah. What's her name? Plastic Love?
Yeah. Maria Takeuchi, Tatsuro Yamashita. This is a type of music in the 80s that was literally marketed as something that you could play in a car that you bought because everyone had money in the 80s and drive around a city. So it's a lot of like horns. It's a lot of funk. It's a lot of like R&B mixed with pop, even early rap. And it's like all the most cutting edge technology at the time was being used for it. It's great. Dive into it. So I love that stuff and exploring it. And there was a movie. Oh, shoot. I always blank on the names. There's a famous trilogy of movies that were made about the 1980s in Japan. The first one's really well known. I want to say it's called like Take Me to the Snow Paradise or something.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that title, but it's a movie about like skiing was really popular in the 80s because it was what rich people did. So it's a movie about rich people skiing. And then there's a second movie about like owning yachts or something. That's the weakest of the three. There's a third movie in it about these like bunch of kids who start their own radio station in Shonan, which is like south of Tokyo, beach country. Like, and that's their logo for their like radio station where they play all this like city pop mixed with like Toto deep cuts. It's bizarre.
Oh, so you just like that character.
I love that character. And also because I have a shirt that looks vaguely similar to the one the kiwi bird is wearing.
Okay.
Because like I love like dumb bright colors to wear during the summer. Like sort of like, yeah, beachish clothes.
Okay.
So I was like, I connect with this character.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Also,
so it's a Japanese character. It's like a mascot.
I guess, yeah. It is a kind of it's an early character, yeah.
Is it still in use? Can you find?
No, I don't think so. I think it was only made for this movie. It's really like I don't know why. I just watched it one day.
Huh, and you're like, oh, that's cool.
I was like, this rules. Look at that bird. Sunglasses and a Hawaiian shirt. That's everything I want. And it's just like, I can
identify with this.
I can relate to this bird. I also don't like putting my photo places. Just
right, I understand.
Yeah, I've always been very like, don't look at me. But also, and this is maybe a stupid reason, I also used to have an image of like I think it was an anime character. I don't know if you know Koji.
Yeah, probably better you have the kiwi bird.
Right. This was the thing. Is at some point, anime characters became like, oh, you can't have that.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I don't know if this will offend you, but it's like it seems like the worst people on the internet. They all have anime characters as their avatars.
I'm not offended. Well, that kiwi is not an anime character.
No, he's not an anime character, but it just seems like if you ever get like really hate comments or like these really like gotcha questions or something.
Gotcha questions.
Well, I mean, everybody on the internet wants to think that they have the next gotcha question.
Do you think Sarah Palin uses an anime avatar now, or
she should if she isn't already? But No, I'm just saying that anime avatars, it's like I always have to be very, very careful when talking to people who have those.
I guess we run in different circles because for me, that's K-pop avatars.
Oh,
it's people
I
with
see.
K-pop avatars that people always get angry at me about something vaguely music related.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, everybody, it seems like just based upon what I know about K-pop is that dealing with the K-pop fans, it's like sticking your finger into a hornet's nest. Is that right?
Really, really well organized hornet's nest. That
A really well organized hornet's nest.
those fandoms online are very organized. I give them that. But yes, hornets are very apt. Sometimes there's many very great K-pop fans. There's also some not so nice ones.
You do a lot of writing with K-pop as well, right?
I used to do a lot more. That one incident I told you about actually scarred me a little bit.
Okay.
I actually stopped listening. Like, I like K-pop as well. Like, and obviously that's a big like music thing to know
Like
about
BTS
this decade.
or something.
I never got into BTS.
Okay.
I respect what they've accomplished.
Okay.
But after that story with Twice, like I actually stopped listening to K-pop for like a year. I was just like, I never want to hear K-pop again.
Wow.
I've rehabilitated myself since, but yeah, I don't write too much about it. And part of that is I actually just think there's so many better writers about it now. At the start of the decade, I used to write a lot more about K-pop, and it was just because there were so few English language people writing about it for publications, and it was just kind of like, oh, cool, I can do this. But now I'm like, oh, these other people are so much better. I'll just focus on Japanese music. So,
right. All right, then. Well, that about wraps up this episode of episode 58 of the
58
of Why Come Japan. My guest was Patrick St. Michael, Japan Times journalist.
Can I do one?
Yeah, no, he wrote a book. Yeah.
Can I do one obnoxious thing?
Yeah,
I apologize in advance.
No, please.
I should have told you before. Patrick St. Michel.
Fuck.
It happens. It happens.
Damn it, Michelle. What is? There's an M. Was it?
It's French.
There's
It's
no
the
A in
French.
there,
The
so I
French
should've
will
said
throw
it.
surprises at you like that.
Yeah.
But no, it's all good. Growing up, actually, like most people actually would call me Patrick Stemickle. Like they wouldn't see the period because I mean most last names don't have periods in them.
Okay.
I've also been accused of having a fake last name.
All right.
People think I made my last name up for clout. Like, you think you have a cool last name. Why would you do that? It's like, I don't. This is what I was born with.
Okay.
Things to plug.
Your book, the one you just hold up.
You go on Amazon, find it, go buy it. I recommend, this is the hard copy edition. You shouldn't buy that because it's $80 for some reason.
Whoa.
Don't buy that. There's a paperback version that is significantly cheaper.
What about the Kindle version?
Kindle version is also very affordable. I highly recommend those.
Okay.
This is a collector's item, or if you really enjoyed what I had to say today, you want to show your respects, drop that 80. But otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at mbmelodies. I usually share stories I've written, and you can hear my spur of the moment thoughts on whatever. You can find me at the Japan Times. We have a lot of stories. I have a lot of end of decade features coming out. The YouTube story will hopefully come out.
Oh, really? So you have a couple in the works.
Yeah. So the YouTube should come out sometime in December. Follow me on Twitter to find out when that comes out. There'll also be a few music related ones coming soon. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. Those are probably the main two places to check out. Do I have anything else to plug? I don't think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was this is not John St. Michael. It is Patrick St. Michel.
My dad is John, so
Yeah.
I'm impressed that you got that.
Yeah. No. That's embarrassing. But anyway,
It's fine. It's all good.
no. I mean, I find it kind of funny. I mean, it's especially nice when the guests are really cool.
Yeah. No worries.
I'm gonna get one of these days. I'm gonna get one of these guests and be so angry with me.
Do you think he's gonna flip the table or something? Like, how
That'd be good
dare
content.
you?
That'd be good content.
That's a
I mean,
You should always get their names wrong, so you try to get them to
Oh,
flip the
Jesus.
table.
Anyway, all right. So next time on this show, Why Come Japan, is YouTuber Mayday-san will be on the show Tuesday. So until then, I'm Radrey, and
this was Patrick St. Michel.
See you guys. Bye.
See ya. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Gotta end the stream. Buy the book. If you like books, you should read it.
Only if you like books.